He hesitated before smiling. Something like that. She started to protest about it being too nice, and he silenced her with a kiss. And I know you know some patient who will love it as well. She smiled and relaxed, nodding. Finally, they arrived at a large concrete building. Fluttershy sighed as she looked out at the window of the covered wagon. It's so... she murmured, then glanced back at him. Nice. It's hideous. All buildings in Hoofington have to be hideous. It's the building code. He sighed, then smiled and got one in return. Just be glad it's not one of those black monstrosities they're building in the core. Yes. I really don't know why Hoofington embraces postmodern minimalism, brutality stuff as primal architectural style, she said as the wagon touched down on the roof of the hospital. Post... what? What post? Was she talking about the buildings looking like posts? She stood and I didn't get an answer. Redheart was standing near the landing pad. Goldenblood rose and nuzzled Fluttershy softly. Take care of yourself, Mommy. She giggled and nearly bounced on her hooves at that word, then flushed profusely and nodded. I will. You take care of yourself, too. Make sure to keep some medicine with you. Then she trotted out of the wagon, looking back once to see him before finally disappearing inside. He sighed and pressed a button. Robronco HQ, please, ladies, he said into a speaker. The wagon lifted into the air and started towards the city core. If I'd thought he'd use now to dig up all kinds of secret information, I was disappointed. He settled back, took out a picture of Fluttershy, and just stared at it for the entirety of the flight. Finally, the sky wagon landed, and his horn packed up several things into his saddlebags before he stepped out. There were 4 Pegasi harnessed to it, and 4 more armed with high-power automatic rifles. Thank you, ladies, he said with a respectful nod to the team before trotting towards the elevator. Hoofington was half reconstructed at this point. The ministry hubs were finished, save for a midnight blue ministry of awesome that rose twice as tall as the rest. The ugly black buildings had an unsettling uniformity, but they seemed undoubtedly sturdy. Clearly, this would take something substantial to take down this fortress of a city. Too bad balefire bombs counted. A balefire bomb with a blast contained inside a shield that liquefied its occupants. Inside, the building had a very incomplete feel to it. After stepping out of the elevator, we passed by several unfinished rooms with ponies still installing parts and panels. Goldenblood seemed to know his way around well enough, walking through the hallways and intersections without hesitation. He finally entered some sort of engineering workshop. There was heavy equipment everywhere that looked quite out of place in the super-modern city. Director Goldenblood, so nice to meet you, the yellow buck with the thin mustache said brightly as he looked up from some piece of machinery. Horse, he replied with a nod of his head. I would have come sooner, but you seem to have your hooves full. Settling in our cozy new accommodations courtesy of the Ministry of Wartime Technology and the Hoofington reconstruction effort, he replied. Goldenblood looked at several metallic spheres. Ah, is this that sprite bot I've read upon? Actually, we've almost readied our production for that model, he said as he covered the balls with a sheet. These are for something else. Now, what brings the director of the OIA to see me? He asked with a broad smile. This, he replied as he lifted a flap on his saddlebags and pulled out a metal rod. It was silvery white, maybe as long as my hoof was wide, and thin as a pencil. He floated it to the yellow earth pony, who took it in his hooves. Well now, what is this? You tell me, Goldenblood said with a thin smile. Well, it's not any alloy of steel I'm familiar with, not aluminum. He juggled it from hoof to hoof. Not celestium or big macintoshium. He tossed it into his mouth and sucked on it for a moment like a metal candy cane. It doesn't taste like silver. He spat it out and caught it right on the end of his nose. What are you? He asked with a little nod. We don't know. We've been digging up ore of that metal underneath the city. I'm curious about its properties. Goldenblood said as he tapped a hoof on the desk. This ore wouldn't happen to be found alongside strange zebra ruins, would it? He asked with a speculative grin. You'd have to ask Rarity about that. Goldenblood replied in a tone that was suddenly far cooler. Horse seemed to get the hint as he looked cross-eyed at the bar balanced on his muzzle. Well, I can do chemical analysis, magical analysis, but personally I like starting with good old-fashioned physical analysis, he said as he trotted to a massive machine that was all hydraulic pistons and gears. He slid the metal into the tiny gap in the middle, and then began to crank wheels to lock it in place. This will tell us the tensile strength of this baby, give us an idea of what we're working with. He pulled some levers, and there was a hum as a large gauge started to turn. 1 kilomac, 2 kilomacs, 3, 4? The needle was now at a yellow bar and steadily climbing. 5 kilomacs? Horse exclaimed. The needle started to go into the red, and the machine began to make ominous whining sounds. There's no deformation at all, Goldenblood mused. Gotta shut it down before it blows the safeties, Horse said as he moved to the side and started to tug at the levers. They didn't budge. Hey, what's wrong with this thing? Goldenblood didn't move. He stared right at the silver rod of metal. Director, move out of there! Suddenly, the whole machine shook, just as a buck walked into the door of a lab. The machine gave a resounding bang, and the rod went flying through the air, buzzing an eerily high-pitched song. It seemed to curve mid-flight, passing right by Goldenblood's ear as it flew straight to the head of the buck in the doorway behind Goldenblood. He dropped instantly, falling in that boneless way that signaled a terminal injury. Calipers! Horse cried, rushing to the fallen buck. Then the yellow earth pony screamed, Medic! Someone get a medic! Slowly, Goldenblood approached the pair, looking down at an inch of rod protruding from the buck's skull. It glowed with his magic as it was slowly pulled free. Director! Horse protested at first, but then gasped. Little silvery wisps were rising from the wound and disappearing into the metal rod. What? How? What is this metal? That's what I need to figure out, Mr. Horse, Goldenblood said softly as he stared at the blood and brains on the tip of the rod, the last wisps disappearing into the silvery metal. That is what I need you to figure out. Coming out of this memory orb was like slowly shoving my right side of my face into a basin of boiling water. I sprawled on my side in Glory's hooves in a corner away from the Brahmin. It was dark, the fire station lit only by the flickering flames of the wan-shielded campfire. A bandage had been placed around my right eye. I tried to ignore the bloody scalpel and coffee cup filled with flesh should not be that color. I jerked, choked, and retched as I brought up the contents of my stomach, which wasn't really much at this point. It turned out, though, that berries weren't so good on the second time around. I felt Glory's hooves move to turn my head. I hope you'd be out longer, she said, as she kept my face down and stroked my mane. It's okay. I got the tumor and cauterized the rest of the socket. Okay, I really did not want to know what that meant. Hurts? Bad? I said, feeling the alcohol barely keeping the burning sensation at bay. I closed my eye and pressed my left cheek to her stomach. I'd like to nominate this day as the most messed up in equestrian history. Oh, it's not all bad, Glory said with a sniff. You found something that caused innervation. Stopped a slaving tribe? Helped me? Went for a ride through Hoofington's storm drain system? I smiled as I nuzzled her. How in Equestria did she keep smelling so good? She was just as muddy and messy as myself. And that's why I said messed up. There's just too many highs and lows in this day. I felt the alcohol slowly win, clouding my thinking. I waited a minute and then smiled. 6 months was pretty optimistic, wasn't it? She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The tears falling on my mane told me enough. She murmured softly, maybe if we were in chapel, or some low radiation, low invasion, some better place. This damned city is aggravating the cancer. Funny, I'd found Hoofington pretty aggravating too. Well, that's too bad. I'll just have to end things here with the Reapers and Rangers pretty quick. Sanguine, she began, but I silenced her with a shake of my head. I don't want to live as a Gorgon or a Manticore thing, and my life isn't worth the damage he'd do to the wasteland with Chimera, I said softly. How can you say that? She sobbed softly. Because it's true, Glory. I'm not that important. Even if he could give me a brand new body, I still wouldn't take it. She hugged me a little tighter, and I sighed. Listen, when I'm done, I want you to go help the college it. Help Zodiac with Steel Pony. You know about medical, technological stuff. Or help out in chapel. They'll need a good doctor. And some pony needs to make sure P21 doesn't get too sour and grumpy. Okay? She sniffed and nodded, and I smiled, remembering. Oh, first we'll have to unseal Steel Pony somehow. Lightheaded. Getting sleepy now. She sniffed and nodded. Let me worry about that. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of you, Blackjack. Some pony taking care of me. I didn't deserve it, but it certainly felt nice. I smiled as the alcohol, chems, and fatigue overtook me. My mind sank into a deep, dark sleep, and for once there weren't any dreams. A dress rehearsal, I supposed, and better than I could have hoped. I felt the firm ring of a gun barrel pressed against my windpipe. Slowly, I opened my eye and looked up into the furious gaze of Ulsri. The gun was a simple single-barreled 20-gauge, but right now I figured it would do the trick. Tears poured down her cheeks as the gun trembled in her grip. Glory was asleep. So were the Brahmin and Philly. I had no idea where Keeper or the ghouls were. Looking into her eyes, I just couldn't work up the will to care. I simply stared. This wouldn't bring back her life. This wouldn't restore her. It would do little besides ending my pain, and then hers once Glory was finished with her. She'd lost everything, and I was the perfect one to blame, though I doubted she'd be in a position to collect the bounty she'd posted. The sallow, sullen mare just stared back as her lips worked on the mouth of the grip, and I smiled. It won't really change anything, but put me out of my misery for a few months early, I said quietly as I levitated a bottle of vodka over and took a drink, feeling the bite of the gun barrel as I swallowed. I'd never seen a mare destroyed before. In that moment, I took everything away from her, even her revenge. She pulled the gun from my throat and trot over to the filthy corner. A few more weeks of me in misery was the most she could hope for. I wish there was some way I could have helped her, something I could have given her. At this point, even revenge would have been a gift for a mare who had almost nothing. She was left following with her father, cleaning up after his Brahmin. I suppose I should have hated her, punished her for what she'd done in paradise. But honestly, all I could spare right now, right then, was pity.